Assalamu alaikum and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our press conference on the COVID crisis and education and the crisis in education that this pandemic has brought in. आज हमारे guests हमारे साथ हैं. We are still waiting for a couple of them to join in, but we'll start the meeting. पिछले 2-3 महीने में, as this crisis has raged on, CERT and SIO of India have made a number of interventions and to the education apparatus, and we have tried to highlight some of the very important concerns which have come up in the way the government has been reacting to this crisis and the very patchwork way in which the government has been trying to address this education crisis. This press conference, this meeting is specifically meant to highlight those issues and to once again stress the many problems which some of the pre-existing problems and some new issues which this crisis has brought up. And we hope that this will at least prompt some more interventions and some sensible policy interventions in this time. Now, fundamentally, as we all know, this crisis has shut down the entire country. It has shut down schooling and education completely. And of course, public health takes precedence over everything else. Shut down the entire country. It has shut down schooling and education completely. The way the government has responded to it has actually shown up a lot of the structural problems which were already present in our education system. For instance, the entire stress has been to somehow use this crisis as a leverage to pivot to e-learning, to pivot to virtual schooling systems or virtual learning.
There is some echo.
And there has been almost
Can you look at the echo, please?
a hasty and almost an unnecessary rush to push people, push students and teachers and institutions towards e-learning initiatives. And sorry for that technical difficulty. For the last 50 or 60 years, ever since the first national education policy and the Kothari Commission recommendation had come in, the entire school system, the schooling policy has been based on a neighborhood school system. That has been the national aspiration in education, to that each neighborhood should be catered to by a public school. Of course, we know very well how much of an abysmal failure that has been, and the inability of successive governments to implement the vision of a neighborhood schooling system. And we can see in this crisis how that failure is coming back to haunt us, because essentially this is a crisis which has many different facets. In India, we have seen districts and even neighborhoods with vast differences in impact. There have been some areas with multiple cases, some areas with virtually no cases. The government's own demarcation of red, green, and orange zones accepts that this is not a crisis that has impacted everyone uniformly. Yet, because of the unequal education system we have, it has the impact has been worsened for the most vulnerable people. If we had a proper neighborhood schooling system in place, the whole crisis could have been managed in a very different way. Neighborhoods, according to their own health requirements, according to their own public health needs, could have responded to the situation in their neighborhood by either keeping schools active or going on with minimal social distancing, or even some methods of homeschooling, or teachers reaching out to schoolwork being physically given out to students in the neighborhood. A lot of localized solutions could have been adopted if we had a proper functioning neighborhood school system. But the lack of that has just shown that there is no way to deal with this at an individual school to school level. What has happened is essentially the better off schools the hierarchy of schools that we have, in which we have the elite and very high end private schools, the uh, effective or ineffective public schools, and then the large number uh, ill-equipped and underfunded private schools, the low-cost schools that actually the Kasturi Rangan Committee identifies as the savior of India's educational system. We have seen in this crisis that this has been a complete breakdown. Only the high-end public schools whose students have access to all kinds of facilities, whose students have access to internet and laptops and their parents' devices, have been able to continue some form of education. Public schools have been abysmal in their reaction, and much more these supposed low-cost private schools, which were supposed to be the solution. We have seen how it has been in any kind of a crisis. They have no capacity to respond, because, as we've been saying for a number of years, they actually have no capacity to operate. I mean, students are studying in atmospheres in classrooms uh, that just don't meet any of the requirements, and yet these are the kinds of schools that are cited as low cost solutions by the current national education policy. So that is something certainly we need to rethink. And the lack of again, the problem with not having a neighborhood school system is inextricably linked to the fact that we have never matched the Kothari Commission's requirement of 4% GDP spending in education. That has never materialized, and that is again an interlinked problem that we must go back to. And in fact, this is a crisis which has forced us to look at what was the original national aspiration, and perhaps we very strongly feel that unless we work towards realizing that, substantial investment in education, along with a robust and functioning neighborhood school system, any crisis like this, which could also hit in the future, will completely destabilize and paralyze the schooling system like it has right now. And also, before going on to our guests, I would like to highlight the government's one-stop solution to everything has been virtual learning and e-learning solutions. It is whether it is classes or examinations, the push has been to take everything online, and this of course has a number of limitations. The first and foremost is sheer lack of access. uh, how No matter how much there has been a proliferation of low cost smartphones and 4G internet, there is still the question of whether quality education can be accessed on such devices unless you have access to a laptop and good internet connection, and you are used to using a laptop and a good internet connection for these purposes. Unless you are trained to use them for education purposes, it is highly questionable whether a student can just get a mobile phone or get a laptop and start attending classes on it. And that is even more true of examinations. Students who are not used to having to accessing or to working on laptops or mobile phones will find it very hard to be using them for the first time to give an exam, and that will naturally be a detriment to their performance. So this entire e-learning push is something that is that unfairly favors those who have access to devices and is exclusionary in its very nature. There is also another thing. I mean, this has been coming for a long time. The national education policy also mentioned that there is a need to create an national repository of e-learning facilities. College teachers are being asked to record their lectures online, and there is some idea somewhere that by putting and recording a few lectures and putting them all online and creating a library of recorded lectures, the need for new colleges can be met with through some virtual video libraries. And this is just the crisis has been used to try to accelerate these sort of harebrained schemes, we would just like to stress again that putting up video lectures or putting up notes on a website is never going to be a substitute for making an educational institution. Uh, Learning is not just about the lectures that are delivered in a class. It is we look at education as a much broader, as a much more comprehensive exercise that requires institutional presence, that requires collective, a sense of collective, being part of a collective, and the necessary interactions that the student as an individual and part of a collective has with teaching faculty and with teachers and instructors. And there can be no replacement for that. And what we are seeing in reading between the lines, the haste to push through or to institutionalize uh, e-learning methods as an alternative to building schools and colleges can never be, I mean, it can never be a pragmatic or a practical solution. And that is something that we must come together and highlight and stress on. And in the end, I would just like to highlight two very recurring issues that have sort of gone by the wayside in this whole crisis. The first is the OBC reservation in undergraduate and postgraduate NEET entrance exams. For a number of years, these OBC reservations have not been provided; they have been deferred, and the seats have been redistributed to other categories, which is, of course, I mean, that is a violation of the Supreme Court's guidelines as well as norms laid down by the government itself. And that ignoring and that continuous violation of OBC reservation in NEET exams, it is just something that we need to highlight at this moment, and we need to get a redressal from it. And also, the other thing is the Maulana Azad National Fellowship, which was supposed to encourage scholarship amongst minority communities, but which the government has. It is a classic example of how this government has not closed down some popular schemes, but defunded and made them extremely ineffective over the years. Uh, we can see that Maulana Azad National Fellowship has effectively become an even year fellowship. It came out in 2016, deferred in 2017, came out in 2019, deferred against in they came out in 18, deferred against in 19, and now it has, so it's coming with a gap of 1 year, and every year the number of seats are being reduced. We also hear complaints about access, about inclusion barriers. So that is this is a very popular scheme which had been launched, but which could never realize its full potential. And these are some important, again, important issues that highlight the increasing challenges of inclusion that our education system is facing. And these are all challenges which have only been exacerbated in this crisis. In fact, it would not be wrong to say that this crisis has actually exposed the inherent structural weaknesses of our educational system. And it's high time we got back to the basics and implemented some of the things that educationists have been saying for 50 or 70 years in this country. Dedicate a bare minimum percentage of our national income, of our GDP, and of our budget to education, and realize this national aspiration of a robust and working neighborhood school system. So, with that very brief introduction of the issues that we are facing, I would just like to invite our esteemed panelists to address this meeting. We have with us Professor Madhu Prasad, a well-known educationist who has been involved in raising education, in writing on and in scholarship around education, and she has very graciously agreed to give us time for this meeting. And I think we are all just waiting to hear from you, Professor Madhu Prasad. I would request the admin to unmute Professor Prasad. Yes, I think.
Is that okay?
Yes.
Yeah, now we can hear you.
Yes. Hello.
Yeah. Good afternoon and welcome, ma'am.
Good afternoon. I was just listening to Fawaz, and I find that he has actually placed before us the entire network of ideas and problems that we are faced with today. It is, of course, a very difficult time. As we know, our education system has been in a crisis for at least 4 decades, if not more. And with that crisis in place and our inability to really do very much with it, even this government, for example, in the last 5 years, has brought forward 3 new education policies, and we still don't know if any of them is going to be in place. But in this situation, we have now been overcome with this coronavirus pandemic, which because of our unplanned lockdown and the time at which it arrived, we have ended up with simply disrupting the entire academic calendar at that period of time, which is actually the most important in our education system, which is the examination time. Actually, examinations should not have the position that they do have in India. But the fact is that in our society, because our system of learning and teaching has so landed up in a crisis, that finally the only thing that counts is, are we able to complete the syllabus? Are we able to pass students or fail students from one grade to the next grade? In this context, many issues which educationists have been raising over the last 20, 25 years have got pushed into the background. And the government is focusing on only one thing. That is, how can we rapidly and through the e-learning and use of technology, how can we use this magic bullet which technology has given us to overcome and conceal all our problems and somehow be able to complete this year with students sitting their exams and being passed or failed accordingly. Now, I think here we are not looking, the government is absolutely not looking at 2 major issues, which is one.
Professor Madhu Prasad, we lost you there. Professor?
What is learning? How do we learn? Okay. So should I wait for my internet?
Yeah. Yes, I think.
Yeah, now is that all right?
Got it. Yeah,
so,
yes, all right. Thank you.
So what we have to look at is, what is learning really about? Is it about A, communicating information to B, and B, absorbing that information and reproducing it whenever required? That, I think, as any educationists, and all of you are in education, either as students or as persons who are working in education, all of us realize that really has nothing to do with education and learning. What is involved in education is the interaction. Interact to us in class. We react and interact with our entire class, with other students, with people senior to us, with people junior to us. So it is this social interaction which is really the core aspect of learning. How do we use social interaction in order to increase comprehension, in order to increase interpretation, in order to increase the range of ideas and knowledge that we can cope with? It is not the case, even a 2-year-old knows how to cope with a certain amount of knowledge. what we want to do in education is to increase the amount of the ability that you have to do of coping with the information that is coming at you. Now, I think it's very, very important for us to realize that today we often say that we are bombarded with information, but few of us know what to do with it. This is really a failure of learning when you have not understood that mere technology is not sufficient. We have a further problem in India, which is that very few of our people actually have connectivity. Very few of our people actually have the resources to be able to communicate through the e-learning process. I want to give you a little information which actually shocked me when I first heard this, this data, which is that only 8% of families with children between 5 years and 24 years have access to a technological device and to the internet. Now, this 5 to 24 years, this is the years of those who are in education, being in education right from childhood right up to research and higher education. And these are the people, only 8% of them have access. Now, are we doing something to improve this? How long will it take us to increase this connectivity? Is close to collapse. The situation was going away. And this is reflected even though our government is making so much noise about e-learning and how they're going to provide education of quality to everybody through e-learning. The government itself has reduced the budgetary input for extending the entire network in the country. We have come down from 604 or something crores that we had last year. We have reduced it to 439 crores this year. Now, both, as we can see, are paltry sums. So clearly, while, because I think they realize that it is both academically and educationally, it is a difficult situation. And two, technologically, we simply do not have that spread. And today, our economy cannot take the burden of such an expansion. So are we simply being given a sugar-coated pill? Everyone is talking about e-learning, everyone is talking about computers, but the figures are absolutely shocking when you look at it. Among scheduled castes, and we know that they constitute a large number of our students, among the scheduled castes, where in a family, you have at least one member of the family is in higher education, the access to a computer or a laptop or a smartphone, that access is denied to 69% of families where there is a member working in higher education. And it goes on like this. There is, if you come down, STs, it comes down from 69 to about 65. And then if you come to OBC, OBC comes down to 59. A denied device through which they can access e-learning. But when you do, upper castes have access to e-learning devices. So we cannot, pretend as though we are covering everybody. Now we know the upper caste constitute about 12% of our population. The others, who we today refer to as often as Bahujan as a category, the others, the SC, ST, OBC, constitute about 85% of our population of educational age. And we see that in fact there is technological exclusion of these categories, whereas some degree of technological reach, which is among the so unequal.
Professor, we've lost you.
That when we talk of making available all that this is not an honest offer, not an honest policy that is coming to us from the government. It is something which is being put out as an aspiration that you are telling our students that they must to somehow connectivity. This aspiration is a consumer's aspiration. This aspiration is a desire to spread, to universalize, as I would say, the aspiration to own a smartphone, a laptop, a computer. It is not the universalization of education at all. Even at the time of the pandemic, when we are in such difficult circumstances, will from this and access with you. So you can imagine what happens to somebody who doesn't have this. Situation. Now, in this situation, we are dealing, which is even during the pandemic. Would you like me to continue?
Professor, yeah, we lost you there for a bit, but please, now you're back. Please continue.
Okay.
No, excuse me. I would request the professor to switch off a video so that we can hear her properly, because I think that is consuming.
Okay. So it says stop video here. Should I switch it off?
Yes.
I don't know if it's on even. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Done. Is that better?
Yeah. Yeah.
All
Yeah,
right.
yeah, you better.
All right. I'm sorry.
No,
This is
that's
the
fine.
problem I'm facing. Can you imagine what will happen if they try to implement it now for exams?
Yeah, it's a very practical demonstration, actually.
Yeah. Professor, we can't hear you.
See, we are simply not familiar with training. But less than 10% of Bahujan children even reach the level of higher education. Less than 10%. SC, ST, OBC, minorities, particularly Muslims, less than 10% complete 12th class and go to higher education. In this situation, in a condition like the pandemic, which also we are handling so poorly, as you can see, we went into a lockdown without planning it. At that time, we had fewer numbers of cases and infections. And the numbers of our infections, we are talking about either equipped, nor trained, nor have the economic capacity, nor does our government have the economic capacity. We are now talking about, we are not now talking about e-learning. This is not at all a practical solution at all. I think we are actually ending up confusing people and putting before them a solution which actually is not a solution at all. Because what we are being faced with today, wherewithal, and we will talk about limitations, as Fawaz pointed out very correctly, that in order to implement this either now and still after the pandemic is over. We would at most be in like this now, and a solution so exclusionary can hardly be referred to as a solution. I think that should that can take us to.
Yes, I think that was absolutely wonderful. Actually, I think we got the takeaway quote would be that this policy is a sugar-coated, the e-learning policy is a sugar-coated pill, and this is not an honest policy, and it's merely the universalization of a consumer aspiration to own certain devices and not the universalization of education. I think that
Absolutely.
is essentially this. It's really the central problematic with this whole idea, with this whole push, unprepared push for e-learning. And we need to talk about some very difficult questions of technological exclusion.
Fawaz, sorry to interrupt, but we really need to keep in mind how completely ill-equipped we are. What a large proportion of our students, I mean, over 90% of students are actually excluded from this technology. That too is
and of course, those from the most vulnerable communities are also the most excluded, as the story goes with Indian education. So that is something I think it's a great takeaway, and we must push that collectively. Uh, the serious questions of technological exclusion and effectiveness of this policy. Thank you.
Yeah.
Is there something you were saying, Professor?
No.
Okay, thank you.
No,
Thank
that's
you. So we'll move forward now. We have with us former director of CERT and currently the CEO of Shaheen Group, Tausif Madikeri. I would request Brother Tausif to join us.
Hello.
Yes, we can hear you.
Hello. Assalamu alaikum. Fawaz sir.
Salam ji.
हेलो. तो मैं एक्चुअली ट्रैवलिंग में था तो थोड़ा सा लेट हो गया ज्वाइन होने में. अलबत्ता प्रोफेसर मधु प्रसाद को मैं सुन लिया, कुछ चीज़ें उनका बातों को सुन लिया जो ऑनलाइन ई लर्निंग के बारे में बात कर रहे थे. मैं क्विकली एक दो तीन जो इश्यूज के बारे में आपके सामने बात रखने की कोशिश करता हूँ, जो हमारा डिमांड्स भी है और बहुत पहले से हम एक कह रहे हैं कि जो अभी जो ई लर्निंग का प्लेटफॉर्म्स है, जो उसका जो इश्यूज जो हो रहा है ई लर्निंग के प्लेटफॉर्म्स की वजह से, जो डिवाइसेस का हो, जो भी हो, जो इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर की चीज़ें हो, तो ये गवर्नमेंट एक बार रीलुक करना है जो इशू सब चल रहा है. उसके अलावा सबसे इम्पोर्टेंट चीज़ ये है, लॉकडाउन में द क्लोजर द रीओपनिंग का जो स्कूल्स रीओपनिंग का जो इश्यूज है, उसके साथ साथ तीन चार इश्यूज जुड़े हुए हैं. एक चीज, अगर रीओपनिंग करना, स्कूल्स रीओपनिंग करना, वो भी डेंजरस है. जो मौजूदा जो हालत है हमारा, जो इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर है स्कूल्स में, गवर्नमेंट स्कूल्स में, इसको रखते हुए रीओपनिंग करना वो भी बहुत ही चैलेंजिंग है. और वो हमारे हिसाब से अभी वो टाइम भी सही नहीं है रीओपनिंग करने के लिए, जैसा बहुत सारे स्टेट्स रीओपनिंग कर रहे हैं. लेकिन इसके साथ साथ जो इश्यूज जुड़े हुए हैं रीओपनिंग के साथ साथ, वो ये है, तो साल भर में जो माइग्रेंट वर्कर्स, जो लेबरर्स को, बच्चों को, जो गवर्नमेंट स्कूल के हमारे जो टीचर्स घर घर जाकर जो उनको स्कूल को लेके आते हैं, वो यहीं पे मिड डे मील्स है, पूरे दिन यहाँ रहते हैं, उनके साथ एक इश्यू ये जुड़ा हुआ है. अगर इन बच्चों को हम स्कूल्स के साथ कनेक्टेड नहीं रखते हैं, तो इन बच्चे जो है फिर से जो है ये लोग काम में, जो लेबरर्स बन के काम करने में फिर से उस पे जाने के चांसेस बहुत ज्यादा है. वो एक चीज है. तो उसको कैसे गवर्नमेंट उसके लिए सोल्यूशन निकालेगा. उनके ऐसे जो माइग्रेंट वर्कर्स है, तो उनके पास उनको इस इश्यू को किस तरह एड्रेस करेगा, तो इसके लिए कुछ रूपरेखा सरकार को बनाना होगा. ये बहुत ही इम्पोर्टेंट है, क्योंकि जैसे आपकी प्रेस नोट भी पढ़ा मैं, जिसमें आरटी के बारे में बहुत ही क्लियरली बताया गया है. तो आरटी का जो इम्प्लीमेंटेशन है वो कंप्लीट फेल्यूर है. स्टेट्स क्या किए हैं पूरे स्टेट्स में, तो पूरा गवर्नमेंट एजुकेशन सिस्टम को, गवर्नमेंट स्कूल्स को बर्बाद कर दिए हैं. हमारे राजस्थान में, कर्नाटका में, यूपी में हजारों हमारे जो गवर्नमेंट स्कूल्स है वो बंद हो चुकी है आरटी के वजह से. बिकॉज द गवर्नमेंट क्या कर रहा है, गवर्नमेंट प्राइवेट स्कूल्स को अमाउंट पे कर रहा है. एक स्टूडेंट्स को 5,000, कर्नाटका में 12,000, कहीं 16,000. ये जो पैसा जो है प्राइवेट स्कूल को गवर्नमेंट भर रहा है, जो आरटी के नाम से स्टूडेंट्स को ले रहे हैं प्राइवेट स्कूल. तो इसकी वजह से जो गवर्नमेंट स्कूल्स का स्ट्रेंथ स्ट्रेंथनिंग था, जो नेबरहुड फेल्योर है, और गवर्नमेंट सिर्फ एक चीज इसको एक क्लॉज को इम्प्लीमेंट कर रहे हैं 10-11 साल से, 2009 से वो सही से इम्प्लीमेंट होने में 10 या 2011 हुआ, 11 से सिर्फ उसी को इम्प्लीमेंट करने की कोशिश कर रहे हैं, वो भी प्राइवेट स्कूल्स में, तो वो भी बड़ा फेल्यूर है। तो ये एक बड़ी चीज है गवर्नमेंट का इस सिलसिले में। उसके अलावा जो मौलाना आजाद नेशनल फेलोशिप का जो इश्यू या स्कॉलरशिप्स का जो इश्यू ओबीसी के आ रहा है या यूजीसी नेट हो, तो ये एक मजाक है, खेल है। कभी हमें अचानक आप आके साल नहीं कर रहे, कैंसिल कर देंगे, और 2 बार हो रहा है उसको 1 बार कर देंगे, फिर उसको अगली साल नहीं करते हैं आप। पहले तो आप 700 फेलोशिप था मौलाना आजाद नेशनल फेलोशिप, उसके बाद आपने उसको नेट कंपलसरी कर दिया। नेट कंपलसरी करते हुए आपने कहा हम 1000 सीट्स रखेंगे, अभी सीट्स को इंक्रीज करेंगे। नेट आप कंपलसरी करते ही बहुत सारे जो माइनॉरिटीज है जो उनको आसानी से मिल रहा था मौलाना आजाद नेशनल फेलोशिप, वो वहाँ कट ऑफ हो गया। तो ये सब जो 1000 कर दिया हमने, ये सब सिर्फ दिखावा है। एक्चुअली जो लाया गया था मौलाना आजाद नेशनल फेलोशिप के, वो इसीलिए कि माइनॉरिटीज को आसानी से स्कॉलरशिप मिल जाए। जब आप नेट कंपलसरी कर दिया तो उसका बात ही नहीं, ऑटोमेटिकली जो है आपको कट ही करना था, माइनॉरिटीज को फेलोशिप देना ही नहीं था, इसीलिए आपने उसको नेट कंपलसरी किया। तो ये जो इश्यूज है ये बहुत सीरियस इश्यूज है। हर साल इस इश्यूज पे हम सवाल उठाते रहे, लेकिन सरकार जो है इस पे ध्यान ही नहीं दे रहा है। उसके अलावा अब हम जब आप देखते हैं नीट का इश्यू, नीट जब आया तो नीट आपने कहा कि मेडिकल एजुकेशन को नीट एक सॉल्यूशन है। हम आज भी इसी इश्यू पे कहते हैं कि देखिए, जब तक आपने सीट्स नहीं बढ़ाते हैं, मेडिकल एजुकेशन में इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर नहीं देते हैं, डिस्ट्रिक्ट लेवल्स में एमबीबीएस सीट्स इंक्रीज नहीं करते हैं, एवरी डिस्ट्रिक्ट हेडक्वार्टर में एक एमबीबीएस कॉलेज विथ 100 सीट्स, मिनिमम 100 सीट्स जब तक आप कायम नहीं करेंगे, आपका जो डॉक्टर्स की जो ये है कमी है, ये सारे इश्यूज को आप एड्रेस ही नहीं कर पाएंगे। सिर्फ आप नेशनल लेवल एक नीट एग्जाम कंडक्ट करके आप ये कह रहे हैं कि मेडिकल एजुकेशन के साथ जो भी इश्यूज रिलेटेड ये खत्म हो जाएगा। आप देखेंगे वेपम उसके बाद ही आया, इसी तरह लाखों इश्यूज से जुड़े हुए हैं। अभी कोविड के टाइम पे जो हमारे पास मेडिकल इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर में जो हालत है वो हमको पता है। WHO कहते हैं कि कम से कम ऑल द कंट्री शुड स्पेंड अराउंड 5% ऑफ इट्स नेशनल इनकम इन हेल्थ सेक्टर। हम कितना खर्च कर रहे हैं? हम अभी भी अराउंड 1.6 to 1.7% पे है। मोदी गवर्नमेंट करते हैं 2025 तक हम 2.5% खर्च करेंगे मेडिकल एजुकेशन पे। तो इन इश्यूज को हम बार बार उठाते रहने होगा, सवाल उठाना होगा। हर प्रेस कॉन्फ्रेंस में हम यही सवाल उठाते रहते हैं, ताकि जब तक ये इश्यू सॉल्व नहीं होगा, चाहे वो एजुकेशन हो, मेडिकल सेक्टर हो, हेल्थ सेक्टर हो, ये 2 इम्पोर्टेंट सेक्टर का इश्यूज अभी तक सॉल्व नहीं हुआ। हाँ, गवर्नमेंट का मोदी गवर्नमेंट जब 2014 में आया था, तभी उन्होंने कहा हम 6% जीडीपी करेंगे, जीडीपी को एजुकेशन सेक्टर में 6% जीडीपी खर्च करेंगे, जो 1964 का डिमांड है। आज तक उन्होंने 6% जीडीपी खर्च नहीं किया एजुकेशन सेक्टर पे। ये इश्यूज को हम बार बार सवाल करते रहना है, और मुझे बहुत खुशी है स्टूडेंट्स इस्लामिक ऑर्गेनाइजेशन ऑफ इंडिया और CERT इन मुद्दों पे बार बार ये सवाल उठाते रहे हैं। और मुझे इस प्रेस कॉन्फ्रेंस में आप इनविटेशन दिए, इसके लिए मैं बहुत शुक्रगुजार हूँ। थैंक यू। मैं ज्यादा देर आपसे ज्वाइन नहीं हो सकता क्योंकि मैं ट्रैवलिंग में हूँ। अलबत्ता मैं पूरा बाद में आपका जो वीडियो है प्रेस कॉन्फ्रेंस का, वो सोशल मीडिया के जरिए से देख लूंगा, रिकॉर्डिंग को सुन लूंगा। थैंक यू।
बहुत बहुत
शुक्रिया तौसीफ भाई।
that was Dr. Tawseef Medikeri. Thank you. और ट्रैवल के बीच में भी उन्होंने हमको ज्वाइन किया, उसके लिए gratitude from our side. इसके बाद I would like to invite Mujahidul Islam, who is an academic at the Azim Premji University. Brother Mujahid, if you could, yeah, I think. Do.
Assalamu alaikum.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, so I think the background has been set beautifully by Fawaz, and what I would like to repeat about that is that this whole crisis, COVID-19, has actually has opened some, it has opened the Pandora box of the problems which exist, or the systemic problems which exist in our country. And so at present we are talking about education, so the systemic problems which is there with education in our country. So when it is about addressing those problems, be it technology or be it anything, so I have what I understand is that technology per se depends upon the way you look at technology. So, and it depends upon your educational philosophy also. So there are two ways to look at this. One is that what the educational policy makers and educationists, they have been telling and formulating policies. They look good, they look very nice, but in practice, the education has been what? Even after NCF 2005. So the first thing is that state, not the present government, state has never been serious about education. So the demand of GDP to be 6% has been very old. And when we talk about RT is like a Trojan horse. So Trojan horse which has come to to strengthen or to implement some what at present we call as the commercial or the consumerist idea of education. So what is the educational philosophy which is there at the grassroots, not in the policy, not in the NCF document? It is behaviorist, and it has not been no one has been able to change it. So you keep blaming the government and keep thinking keep expecting the government to change it. I don't know, because I am frustrated with all these, repeating the same thing again and again, and demanding the government to do this, do that, keep demanding it. So what I'm trying to say is that one is that the education philosophy is exclusivist. The system school is exclusivist. School as a technology is exclusivist. And that's the reason you come up with, even if you take technology as a blackboard as a technology, or a book as a technology, as a classroom as a technology, as a school as a technology, they all at present are based upon the educational philosophy at the grassroots, which is behaviorist and which is exclusivist. And that's the reason we see at present we start blaming, because I call myself as an Edtech expert. Okay, so I am I speak from the side of technology. I'm very I keep saying that I'm very evangelical about using technology. But what is technology? And that is a question. It's not like when you say technology is about online learning. So what happens if you start thinking take examinations? Forget online examination. Examination itself is problematic. The present system of examination. So whether you do an online exam or you don't do an online exam, whether you have access or you don't have access, see, most of the kids, at least we will say that a larger percentage of the children today have access to school. But what is that school doing to them? So even if you talk about education has to be the way NCF defines is that it has to be like there is when we start critiquing about that at present technology being technology not being the solution for education, we actually start romanticizing thinking about the schools and the classrooms being able to serve the purpose of education. No, they are also not happy. They have also failed. So and and that is something which we have to think and rethink. And some of the points which has been there in this press conference, they all can be connected to each other. So one is what I'm highlighting is the behaviors and the whole the way we look at people with the human being and consumerism. These two things are like consumerism and behaviorism, both are running together, and it is actually very market driven, highly market driven. So there is a profit line. So whether you take a book as a technology, that also is profit driven. Whether you take the private schools or a low cost private school, they don't have a purpose of education. So be it state or be it the private institution, they both have an agenda behind education, and that agenda is actually not education. So you keep repeating that like so my point is uh, we have to be uh, when this pandemic, like the pandemic has opened the Pandora box. So the way I look at it is that okay, government is trying to say that this is we will bring online education, and then we start critiquing, like criticizing, like there's no access. How can technology solve this problem? And then we say that like technology, like there is one way to look at technology, digital technology, online learning, is that it is only bombardment of information. So that is again a very biased way to look at online learning or e-learning. Uh, and it actually is a question like how a children learns. That is a question in itself. Like at home, when they engage uh, uh, with their neighbor, with the school, with the YouTube video, they are they not learning? So I'm like ignoring at present. I'm like not saying, I'm not talking about the issue of access, but what I'm trying to say is that even if you give access at which at present is there in terms of the school access, so everyone, like most of them have school access, but is it? No, it's not able to solve the problem of education. And there are like a lot of issues which emanates from there. Now what should we do? That is a question. Like we keep demanding from the government, that is fine, like we keep demanding from the government, but how do we don't we get fed up, because I am saying that not the present government. I'm saying the state has never been serious about education, and state has an agenda, and and it is actually very colonial in one way, that and it serves the purpose of the colonial purpose of the objective of education. So, and that is the reason you keep seeing all this. So even if you give 100% access to everyone, like everyone has mobile device, everyone has smartphone, everyone has computer, everyone has internet, then too with online education you cannot solve the problem the way we have not been able to solve the problem of education with school access. A lot of school access with RT, the Trojan horse. The reason I say that as a Trojan horse is actually to strengthen the consumerist and behaviorist idea of consumer driven or the market driven understanding of philosophy or ideology of education. So then how do we look at this problem, and how do we solve it, like as civil society, as people of people who are not associated with the government? So one is that we keep advocating, we do this press conference, but what is the other way? The other way is actually to look at, when we say neighborhood school, I would like to bring people towards action now. Like no, it's not only by demanding this Kothari Commission to come back and neighborhood school to come back can we solve this problem. Schools, when you say that online education is not going to solve this problem, you are actually trying to say this also, that schools are able to solve this problem. Physical access to schools is able to solve this problem. That is a question in itself, and that has to be introspectively, we have to look at it. And that is the reason when I say that at present the way to solve this problem would be to start thinking and creating those neighborhood schools by ourselves. So that is, and then demanding the government to recognize them, as neighborhood learning schools, which is created by the civil society, which is created by the people, by the community, by the society. So, and then that becomes, that becomes a challenge to the privatization of education, the idea of privatization of education also. And there are a lot of things, like a lot of layers to it. But what I'm saying is that the way to mm, demand this from the government is not only by asking and putting, just repeatedly doing press conferences, repeatedly collecting, doing meetings. It's not going to solve it. So yeah, and then we keep the other way. The other way to look at it is that if we change these fundamental flaws or fundamental problems of education, that is the behaviorist idea of education. So, for example, at present, if we ask for that examination should not happen, so what should happen? So what should happen? But examination should not happen. But it's not only to address the problem of COVID. It's actually to call for abolishing the present ways of examination. And that is because the reason I'm saying this is that it is very exclusionary. It excludes. It just keeps excluding. And but that is the purpose of school education, to exclude people, to keep excluding. So to keep filtering everyone, and like filtering and taking some cream out of it, and then so if we start thinking in this way, and we start thinking, as of course, which is mentioned in the press note which has been released, that school education as a public good, and then we will come towards thinking in terms of what kind of technology at present in this situation of pandemic. So there are 3 or 4 layers here. One is not that technology, if you just blindly say that technology is not going to solve this problem, there'll be a lot of questions on this Zoom meeting itself. So one is that, yeah, if we start thinking in this way, there'll be like ways to address this problem. For example, internet is not there. First, I would like to say that if you say 100% internet access, that doesn't solve the problem. So what kind of technology? They're like what the Gandhian idea of technology is appropriate technology, or the technology which is possible, and which is there already, which can be created by the local people there. So and it doesn't reject the foreign the modern technology. I'm not saying that it is. So I take some ideas from Gandhi, but it doesn't mean that you reject digital technologies. I don't say that. So, for example, if there had been this idea of, when we say neighborhood school, so similarly, if there had been the idea of community radios, it would have been like able to address some very important problems at present, to reach out to children, if there had been. But we don't have that culture, because we're just going in one direction about digital technology. So which is itself very behaviorist, which is itself very consumerist. So so this is something which I'm putting in front of this panel here. And you keep repeating about all the other aspects, about GDP and increase the GDP and all, but we have to think about how do we at present create pressure on the state to actually be pushed towards these changes, bringing these changes. These changes means that when we say that the philosophy, the flaws with the educational philosophy has to change at the grassroots level. NCF addressed that. NCF 2005 is addressing that, but it has not been able to. It has been unsuccessful, I would say. It is there still it is there. The discussion is still there in the elite circle. So when CCE when continuous comprehensive education like CC, the idea of CC was brought, it was how was it taken? The way technology is taken. So how the technology is taken, like when you bring digital technology, it again becomes behaviorist. So you start thinking about smart boards. You start thinking about a examination like smart intelligence scoring, applying artificial intelligence to score, and again it becomes like just asking some objective questions and they are able to answer, and then the machine is trying to decide whether the children knows or doesn't know all those things. Again they are and these kinds of machines have been made in the past also, before these digital technologies, online technology which you're seeing. So it has always been the story. I'm saying that the story has always been like this, with radios, with TVs, with the schools, with the blackboards, with the printed books we have. Okay. So the model of low tech high tech, hybrid model of low tech high tech at present, and then uh, that is supplemented, or that, like, I'm talking about a system in which all these things can be put into place, supplemented by starting learning spaces at present by people like us in our neighborhoods, to push, to show that government neighborhood schooling is possible, and it is not, and these spaces will not be commercial, it will be completely free for everyone can come and learn there, everyone in the sense that a small groups, those kinds of groups, and then asking the government, putting pressure on the government. So yeah, so I would like to yeah, these are the things which I would like to look at. Maybe there can be questions and there can be more discussions to uh, yeah.
Thank you, Brother Mujahid. That was, I think there were some very interesting questions, and of course, a lot of things to think about. But in our present immediate context of this crisis, there's the question of appropriate and necessary technologies in particular communities. That is something we must think about, and we must think about it instead of the idea of this universal, some one size fits all solution for the one kind of technology or one kind of solution for the whole country, and instead to think of an approach. So amongst all other things, I think this is one thing we in the immediately need to start not only thinking but also probably coming up with some ideas for. Anyhow, we will thank you for that wonderful intervention, and we will now move towards the concluding part of this meeting. And I would request the director of CERT, Brother Syed Muzakkir, to come forward with his concluding remarks.
Thank you very much. I would also like to thank all the participants and co-panelists who spoke before me for their very valuable time as well as input into this discussion. Right now, much area has been covered. Specifically, just to recap what we discussed here, there has been a massive failure of the neighborhood school system. In the implementation of the neighborhood school system, for the last 70 years, more than 70 years since the independence, and more than 10 years of RTE, we have still lagged terribly in implementing a neighborhood school system, which has now, this whole corona pandemic has brought this into sharp relief, how our education system has kind of come to a grinding halt because it has not been able to cope up with the crisis. Similarly, another big area that needs focus is that of investment in education. That has been, again, much has been covered by the previous panelists, so I will not go into detail regarding that. Again, the limitations of the e-learning measures which the government, whether it is the union government or the state governments, they have been taking, it has been thrown into sharp relief. whether it's the internet-based learning or recently the Kerala government's initiative to broadcast through or use the television network to do so. Again, unfortunately, it has resulted in a death of a Dalit student who ended her life because she lacked the access due to her, socioeconomic condition. Similarly, and another thing which I think has not been covered that much is that of examination. The recent UGC guidelines have specified technology-based argumentation to conduct examinations. However, again, what problems are bested due to technological or lack thereof uh, is again same with respect to the technology being used to conduct examination. These are the things that have brought into question again, as has been discussed by the previous this thing. How inclusive are we? How inclusive do we want our education system to be? The OBC issue, more than 10 or around 10,000 seats for the past several years have been not been allotted, which are due constitutionally mandated and due to the OBC community. It has been denied to them. Similarly, Maulana Azad National Fellowship regularly being skipped, and again the number of seats, and there are, apart from that, two important problems that are there are that for every the year that are being skipped, every new notification only talks about granting seats to the year that it is being issued for, and not for the previous years that have been skipped, thereby effectively rendering those seats as lapsed. Again, this is what could it be more demonstrative of systematic marginalization of an already marginalized minority communities. Similarly, the number of seats, again, to be frank, a joke in a country such as India, with more than 1.35 billion people in population, the largest youth population in the world, and we still are not we are not able to free up the seats. Again, this connects up with the question of investment in education, be it in infrastructure or be it in apart from that, into ensuring an equitable, accessible and quality education system. Keeping all these things in mind, the Students Islamic Organization of India and the Center for Educational Research and Training are proposing the following demands and suggestions for consideration of the government. And again, as the previous panelist Mujahid Bhai has said, apart from that, we also have to examine into what we as a civic society can proactively contribute in changing this situation, ensuring our part in bringing about the transformation. First of all, the Right to Education Act, it must be again, one question about that is it has to be considerably expanded. Another big issue has been a colossal failure to implement the Right to Education Act that has resulted in the failure to implement neighborhood school system, which is a mandate under Section 3 of the RTE Act. But however, this has not been done. So RTE Act must two demands in this regard. One, it has to be expanded so that it covers whole of the school education, starting from pre-KG right down to high school +2 or pre-university level. It has to cover all of that. And secondly, strict implementation must be ensured so that the right to the positive aspects of the right to education bear fruition. Secondly, importantly, many of the problems are related to this is that of government spending on education. Currently, for the fiscal year 2019-20, the government expenditure on education was a mere 0.45% of India's GDP. If we take it as a share of government spending, then it was merely 3.4% of government spending on education. This this has been, terrible criminal act, one could say, on the part of the government to neglect. I mean, so much is being said about making India great, so much is being said about the future of India, and we lack the will and we lack the foresight to actually invest in the future of India. And this is one big issue that is going on. 6 to 7% of GDP pegged to GDP, if that is not committed by the government, by the state, then nothing can be, I mean, no expectation can be made of making India great. Another big problem is that government's lack of commitment to education system is being turned towards private sector, and in a very vulgar manner, or one could say, and that is through commercialization of education, whether it is low cost private schools that are being pushed, the government pushes them to fill in its lack in the education arena. But all of these, the problem is that education basically is a public good. If that is not ensured, that it remains public good, so and a right of every single citizen, then it can very easily become a commodity of the market, up for grabs, up for commercialization, commodifying education, and that is what effectively has been happening. And as we know, education is one of the biggest education and medical field is one of the biggest earning sources, commercial ventures, most unfortunately. And not to mention, many of the politicians are themselves involved in this, because they own many of the educational enterprises around the country. These things must be cut down, otherwise they have terrible social costs in terms of affordability, equity, and accessibility of education, and quality of education, thereby rendering it into a very elite and exclusivist sphere, where it is not accessible to bulk of the population. Technology based education, technology based learning, we have seen that, like, it has a number of issues and problems, least of all that it brings to fore the question of accessibility. Majority of students, majority of marginalized section are not able to access a education if there is a move to do that. Much light has been shed on this especially by Mujahid Bhai on this, with respect to that educational tools and educational philosophy is basically colonial, outdated, and exclusivist. It is not aiming to include people. It is not looking at it as a social good, as a public good, as a transformative, as a source for public social transformation. These things have to be considered before moving into any kind of technology. It has to be basically, first of all, socialized, made accessible, be a transformative source for the people. On the issue of reopening schools and all that, primarily, unfortunately, India's COVID experience, unlike many other countries, they went into lockdown and they opened up when the cases started going down, basically when there was a bell curve on that. Unfortunately, India, it has been a rising curve. We went into close down when cases were not as much they are today, and we are still having a progressive trend, meaning every single day we are having more and more cases, and we have ended up opening up the society basically. From today on, more opening places of worships, so many other things are being opened up. The big question is that what does it entail for the safety of public? Terribly and most unfortunately, the government has shown itself to be apathetic to the plight of people. In this regard, opening up schools is a terrible idea. It is only going to mess up further the safety and the health of students will be seriously compromised. But at the same time, on the other hand, there is a huge chunk of the marginalized people who come from socially, economically, and geographically disadvantaged sections, for whom education was not only a source of education but also meant much more. As Dr. Tausif pointed out, they will be again marginalized and forced to go back into to seek avenues other than education, maybe go into labor and other revenue generating as avenues to make up for this loss. So where does the government step in, and how does it deal with all this is a big question. On the question of examination issue, again, the whole idea, the whole philosophy on which the current education, a very colonial model, is based, is that it merely tests, it does not test comprehensively and continuously, does not evaluate and examine the students. Rather, it's kind of a one-off marathon, either at the end of the semester or end of the year. And it's just whatever you are able to do at that moment, whether in fact you are qualified, whether there is a continuous and progressive development in students. These things are not being measured. And secondly, importantly, with respect to the practical aspects, if this COVID issue is not brought under control by July 2020, then all examinations must be waived off, and an aggregate and score of the previous semesters or the previous examination must be taken into consideration to evaluate the students, and their promotion or or detention in their can be decided accordingly. On the question of OBC and Maulana Azad National Fellowship, there is a basic need to reiterate the reason why reservation and affirmative action was favored by the framers of the Constitution, and why they have brought this as a part of our Constitution. And because there are so many communities in India who have been socio-historically and economically marginalized, where they don't have level field of transforming their life, and to ensure that they have that opportunity. And that is why the whole idea of reservation and positive affirmative action and positive discrimination was brought into question. We have to keep this in mind, and SIO and CRT reiterates our stance in favor of reservation, and this reservation again carries a number of issues. First of all, that all reservation must be carried out throughout India without prejudice to any one category of reservation, first of all. And second of all, reservation issue must be implemented across the board, whether it is the state level reservations or the all India level reservation, without any prejudice to any two, equally for both, and all at both levels they must be implemented, which unfortunately at the moment is not happening, as we saw in the case of NEET examination and the OBC quota not being implemented. I mean, what could be it reeks of systematic discrimination and systematic marginalization by the government. And past few years, around 10,000 seats have been not allotted for the OBC people. Again, it brings into question increasing in the number of seats, increasing in the infrastructure and the availability. As Dr. Tausif highlighted, we need to expand considerably into spatial expansion, as well as geographical expansion, as well as infrastructure expansion of education, to ensure, especially medical education, in the case of NEET and all, in the case of medical education, that it has to be to ensure that uh, we are able to rise up to meet these challenges, which most unfortunately we currently are not. Similarly, with Maulana Azad National Fellowship, it must be compulsorily made annual. Notification should be issued, made into an annual fellowship. The number of fellowships must be increased. No limitation for years must be kept. Like, the notification currently talks about the previous year only. Anybody before that, like the 2020 notification, only allows for people who qualified in 2019. The previous year qualifiers are not allowed to be part of this. Again, this what does this mean? People who don't make the cut and have qualified are no longer have the opportunity of securing this, even though they may be deserving of that. This has to end. No limitation on the years applied. Anybody could apply who are eligible, and again, whoever are selected. The rest can have an opportunity in future. And with respect to that major issue, the whole question of UGC net, people who are qualifying for UGC net, who are qualifying for UGC net JRF, they already have an avenue. Linking up that, for whether it is for Maulana Azad National Fellowship or Rajiv Gandhi National Fellowship for SC/STs, linking UGC net for these fellowships does not make any sense. This must be delinked. People who are eligible for that, who have the opportunity there, can go down that path. People who don't have avenue there can come here and secure this. And finally, with respect to NEET and other central examination, and how the OBC issue had been mismanaged, how a whole state reservation quotas were appropriated by the union government to ensure. I mean, in this regard, the statistics of especially with respect to medical education of Tamil Nadu state are very illuminating. They have been successfully able to transform SC/STs and OBCs, having more seats in education, in medical education, leveling the field with respect to these communities. But right now, the union government has been appropriating their state quotas and using it for the union government, and in that also criminally, one could say so. They have allotted it for, say, economically backward, which the current government had brought in this issue last year. They have been allotted, but OBCs have been neglected, and the state mandated quotas have been neglected. Those seats have been appropriated into the general pool at all India level. These are problematic. SIO and CERT have a fundamental position on the central examination, is that whereas the logic of having a standardization can be understood, a national level standard framework can be framed, and the authority to hold, evaluate, and in what form examinations may be, that must be left off to the states. It must be a state prerogative in line with the federal structure of India, that the states decide through which medium, through which appropriate platform they conduct these examinations, to ensure that a standard is maintained. National standard framework can be framed, and the prerogative left off to states to decide how they would conduct examination or not conduct examination, or whatever medium they choose to seek through. These are the issues that have been plaguing the Indian educational system, which we have placed, and hopefully we hope these things come into, I mean, we are able to make inroads. We are able to help the Indian education system transform into a more effective, more accessible, more equitable, and better quality education system. And not to forget that our own contribution, the civic society's contribution in ensuring transformation, in our own contribution in the transformation, in the social transformation, our part in the social transformation, we have to play.
Excuse me, I wanted to add some 2-3 points. Can I intervene? Do I have 2-3 minutes?
Yes, Mujahid ma'am.
Yeah. So one request I would like to make is that no student should be detained based upon his previous days. That is my request to you people. And the other thing is that other thing which I was like speaking in a very practical way. What I would say is that in this situation where there is a lockdown, schools are closed, colleges are closed, there has to be a way. That's the reason I brought that point of appropriate technology. Like there has to be multiple ways to engage with each and every children. The way the teachers, every teacher should be like should try to engage. It's not about completing the syllabus or taking exam or doing this, doing that. That is not education. What is education at present should be that teachers should reach out to each and every student, every teacher, every student should be reached out, and there should be a way to engage with them, either by visiting them, either by calling them, and then thinking about how do we keep engaging with these kids so that they are not left out there, they don't stop and they don't get dropped out, because this is this is very very, and government, civil society organization, everyone should be serious about it. Otherwise it's going to result in a big problem. So yeah, so something which is concrete, I would say we should ask for, demand, and we should try for.
Thank you, Mujahid bhai, for this. Now we can open the forum for question answers. If our participants and our guests from the media would like to field any questions, the panelists are here to take questions.
You can also send in your questions on the chat, and we'll ask them to the participants if possible.
Yeah, questions can be directed to Fawaz bhai. He will.
Actually, we are sorry for that. We have already really overshot our time. We were supposed to end this at 3:15. It's almost going to be 4. So I think unfortunately we'll have to end this right now. So if unless there are some very quick questions, I would just like to thank everyone for joining us, especially Professor Madhu Prasad for taking out the time amidst all this crisis. Thanks a lot for being with us, and also Dr. Tausif and Mujahidul Islam. And I would like to thank CRT for organizing this wonderful meeting. And hopefully, we'll continue these conversations and try to work towards some of the recommendations that were made here today. Thank you, everyone, and we'll now take your leave. Salam.
Thank you.